welcome to On Trial, starring Mark Radulich, also starring Sean Comer. Hope you're ready, Hollywood, because you're on trial.
Ho, ho, ho. It's Christmas season in the courtroom. All rise. Judge Santa Claus has entered the courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is On Trial, brought to you by the Radulich Broadcasting Network. And tonight, I am your prosecuting attorney, Mr. Mark Radulich. On the docket is the Arnold Schwarzenegger, some might call it a comedy. It's certainly a holiday picture, our only holiday picture that we're doing for this particular podcast this year. Jingle All the Way, or as we like to say, Jingle All the Way. Apologies to Alexis Hana. I didn't upload the cookie song that you sent me. I'm sorry. Too busy watching Elseworlds. That being said, laying in the defense tonight for Jingle All the Way is Mr. Sean Comer. How do you do, sir?
Hey everybody, I'm Sean, you're not. Happy holidays, and welcome to the show where we talk about a kinda, sorta, possibly stolen screenplay that might have never happened if a 20th Century Fox remake hadn't fallen through.
Whatever.
Yeah, this movie has kind of a weird story behind it.
I was going to say, whatever do you mean, Sean?
Well, I am so very glad you asked. You see, once upon a time, circa right around 1993, 1994, a high school teacher named Brian Webster wrote and started shopping a screenplay called Could This Be Christmas? He sent it to a number of studio. Well, correction. According to my notes here, Murray Hill president Bob Laurel first purchased the screenplay from him in 93. In 94, he shopped it around to a number of studios, including Fox, but nobody was apparently biting. He didn't really have any takers until many, many moons later, when Murray Hill Publishing sued 20th Century Fox in 1998 for $150,000 with claims that the film we're talking about today, Jingle All the Way, contained no less than 36 similarities with Webster's original screenplay. In fact, Laurel would go on to claim that a Fox scriptreader had pretty much copied the ideas in virtually in their entirety. And in 2001, in this case, the big boys were made to pay. Fox was found guilty of stealing the entire concept, including the characters, plot, and dialogue, and were ordered to, in fact, pay not $150,000, but a combined $19 million, breaking down to $15 million in damages and $4 million in legal costs to Murray Hill, with a portion of it, in fact, going to Webster. For the record, Laurel actually never received a dime. He died a few months before the verdict. On appeal, the damages were kind of truncated down to $1.5 million before the verdict itself was quashed entirely in 2004 by a judge who ruled that the idea had in fact not been stolen, since it was technically Cornfield's, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Cornfield's screenplay, specifically, hang on. Got to look up my notes here. His actual name. Where was it? Credited screenwriter Randy Cornfield. Technically, it was their screenplay that Fox bought, whether it had been ripped off or not, supposedly before anybody else could have possibly read Could This Be Christmas? The reason I bring up the possibility of this having never happened due to a remake falling through was because prior to this, star Arnold Schwarzenegger and director Chris Columbus were both attached to Fox's Planet of the Apes remake. That fell through. They were both all of a sudden free, and so they were able to pivot over to Jingle All the Way. And the result is we got a movie that was... It's one of those really strange ones that has a legacy kind of muddied by both really profoundly negative critical reviews, but at the same time, in latter years, it has become this kind of quirky cult classic. It's actually what I would best liken it to as holiday movies go. It wasn't one of those that kind of became an instant classic of our generation, like A Nightmare Before Christmas. It's more like Hocus Pocus. One of those movies that really didn't make a huge splash when it was released, but somewhere along the line, especially in like about the last, let's call it 5-10 years or so, it's become this immortalized, beloved holiday classic among some people. And I got to admit, I first saw it in high school. I think it was aired during a study hall as kind of a Christmas treat to all of us to just kind of relax for the day. And I didn't think much of it then as a teenager. But watching it for this show for the first time in so many years, goddamn, blasphemous as this might seem, I think I might like this almost as much as A Christmas Story. Like almost as much as Home Alone. It feels weird to have those words coming out of my mouth, but that's kind of where I am.
Okay. Those are all your notes, sir.
I was going to say the one and only thing I forgot, and this is kind of minor since this is one case where I really don't think gross matters all that much. Made on a $75 million budget, which is kind of understandable since you had a fairly big cast. It was comprised of course, Schwarzenegger and Sinbad playing the leads, but the late, great Phil Hartman in the final movie, in his final work to be released after his unfortunate tragic death. Rita Wilson, Jake Lloyd, Curtis Armstrong, Robert Conrad, and Jim Belushi. For all that, and for a $75 million budget, it made a modest $129.8 million. So it made its money back, but it wasn't a blockbuster. But again, this is a case where the whole might be bigger than the sum of its parts.
All right, so here's our 10-cent plot synopsis, such as it is. It's Christmas time in Hollis, Queens. Mom's cooking dinner and collard greens. No, it's Christmas Eve, and we have Arnold Schwarzenegger playing a workaholic dad. He's a salesman. And we have Jake Lloyd playing the neglected son, and Rita Wilson playing the wife. Phil Hartman plays a sleazy neighbor who's trying to bed Arnold Schwarzenegger's wife. And then there's Sinbad. Wait, let me get there. So, it's Christmas Eve, and he was told 2 weeks ago to buy a toy for his son that is no longer available because it's the toy of the year. It's the Cabbage Patch Kid of that year. It's the Tickle Me Elmo. It's the thing nobody can get. It is Turbo Man. And he's doing this, he wants to make sure he gets this toy for his son because he misses everything else. He missed his last karate instruction where he earned another belt. And just basically it's the old, I'm never there for my kid type thing. And so he's trying to make up for it in one foul swoop by giving him the one toy that he really wants. Well, as I said, he was supposed to have gotten it 2 weeks ago, and he doesn't want to be in a situation where he has failed his wife by not listening to her. So Christmas Eve, he goes out into the world to try to find this toy. Of course, none of the stores have it. He goes store to store to store. Nothing. Along the way, we meet another dad who is trying to earn his child's love and affection by getting them the toy that they want and not being able to. Sinbad. Hilarity ensues, if that's what you want to call it. There's all different machinations and twists along the way. At one point, a corrupt Santa, Jim Belushi, tries to get him to buy a knockoff Spanish edition. There's a radio contest where they get a gift certificate for a toy that ends badly. This all culminates in a parade which they have been trying to get the dad to come to, but he's been out all day. Through sheer happenstance, the dad, Arnold Schwarzenegger, ends up filling in for the guy that was supposed to play Turbo Man in the parade. Sinbad decides he's going to, and by doing so, he'll get his hands on a special edition Turbo Man doll for his kid. Well, Sinbad wants that toy too, so he dresses up like the bad guy, and they have what one might call a real-life fight, complete with putting a child in danger. They eventually get to the conclusion of the fight, and it is found out what Sinbad has done, and so they go to arrest him. But Jake Lloyd, who is the son, gives him the toy. God bless us, everyone. And all is forgiven, and we have a Merry Christmas. And oh yeah, Rita Wilson doesn't sleep with Phil Hartman. Whew. What can one say about this movie? This is the sort of thing, I mean, here's the thing. This is a good idea for a skit, not a great idea for a movie. It's incredibly underwritten. I mean, if the idea for Jingle All the Way was to write a movie about consumerism at Christmas time, people have lost the spirit of Christmas, and it becomes maulings at Walmart. I'm all in for a movie like that, by the way. But then write that movie. That's about 20 minutes of this one. The rest of it is just the antics of I almost hate to call him a shitty dad. I think he's incredibly underwritten. I mean, look. Let me say this. Arnold Schwarzenegger gets by in a lot of bad movies with his incredible charisma. Arnold Schwarzenegger has Hulk Hogan, take a drink, levels of charisma. And that gets him through in a lot of movies where if you took him out of it and put somebody with no charisma in there, you would have no movie. So the first bits of this where you have this guy who has no character. There's really no character to him. You get to see a little bit of his, he's kind of a, he's a salesman, and that's all he is. That's the brush he's painted with. Neglectful, forgetful, but he's this hell of a salesman, and that's his one character trait. Again, extremely underwritten. And so you're supposed to watch this man go through this arc where, at the end of it he realizes it's not about selling mattresses, it's about being there for your family. I mean, he gets there. There's an arc, but I did not find myself rooting for this lack of a character. I did not find myself wanting him to find the spirit of Christmas. I found myself annoyed that it all worked out for somebody who didn't deserve it. So, getting back to my other point. So, like I said, the first 20 minutes of this movie, 20 minutes to half an hour, deals with him trying to get this doll, and I think it does a good job of lampooning the consumer culture at Christmas time. But there's a lot to the consumer culture at Christmas time that can be talked about besides punching each other out for a gift. There's so many other things they could have talked about in this movie. They could have brought up. They could have made fun of. They could have lampooned. they decided to go for a lot of sight gags and slapstick. One of the criticisms in Rotten Tomatoes that comes up again and again is how uneven the tone is. Yeah, I would say uneven's a good way to describe it. Because instead of making some poignant points about how we lose the spirit of Christmas at Christmas time, we're in for a lot of pratfalls and and physical humor. This is the sort of thing years later Melissa McCarthy will end up doing really, really well in her career. Okay, Melissa McCarthy does these kinds of movies now where instead of writing a plot and creating characters, she just falls down a lot and makes a lot of and cracks wise. So therein lies the problem with this movie. Is that it started out as one thing, and then it goes a completely different direction. And by the time you get to the end, which is so over the top absurd, I'm not even sure how to handle it in an argument. It's like, if you don't think about it and you're just kind of watching this movie passively with your family around Christmas time amongst the hundreds of other Christmas movies that are there, it's like, if you're just there and you're like, well, we're going to watch Home Alone and we're going to watch Die Hard, it's a Christmas movie, and, we're going to watch Hallmark Christmas movies, and we're going to watch the Santa Claus. Like, okay, sure, you throw this one in there, it entertains you for 90 minutes, 89 minutes, even better. It entertains you for 89 minutes, and then you're on to the next thing and you don't think about it. Then the ending isn't nearly as insulting and terrible as it is if you actually put the kind of critical thought I have to in order to talk about this movie for this podcast. Because when you really think about it, the ending is so absurd and so tonally off from the first half of the movie that it's almost as if, like, in the writer's room, they ran out of stuff to say about Christmas, so they were like, okay, well, we need to come up with a big finish, so we'll invent this, this gag where he becomes Turbo Man with his magic jetpack. Let me talk about Phil Hartman for a minute. So, Phil Hartman starts off as this character who's just, he's Ned Flanders, right? He's just the best of the best, the goodest of the goodest, right? And it turns out that because they want you to, but you spend half of the movie kind of rooting for the guy because he's a good dude, and then there's the switch where all he really is just wanting to sleep with the one woman in town that doesn't want to sleep with him, and you're supposed to say yay when she throws the eggnog in his face, and it's like, it's so, by the time we get there, it is so overdone. I mean, and Phil Hartman does a halfway decent job of coming off sleazy, but again, by the time you get there, you just don't care. It was one of those where I'm fine with the fact that she didn't want to sleep with him, but there had been nothing at that point done to where other than just her own sense of loyalty, she would have gone like Schwarzenegger's character hadn't done anything for her at that point that she would have known about. And at the time that's all happening, she's still mad at him for being gone all day and not getting the toy. So, I don't know, I found myself being very irritated by this movie, as you can tell. Normally, my arguments are pretty straightforward. I'm just baffled by how bad this movie is. Which brings me to Sinbad. I've often talked about some of the characters just kind of, yelling at the camera. And it was like, well, Schwarzenegger gets by with natural charisma. There's a lot of pratfalls and sight gags. Sinbad, what are you going to do? What's your purpose in this movie? And his was, I don't want to say something insulting about him as a comedian. So I'll say this. He's just, every line he delivers, every bit of the movie that he's in, the exception of like one bit of dialogue when they're in the diner, his job is to just be over the top. Everything is over the top, unbelievable. Choking a woman online, all the physical stuff he does with Schwarzenegger. And I almost feel like that's the reason why he was casted. Like, you couldn't, like, granted, Kevin Hart wasn't the thing at the time, but, like, you couldn't get a diminutive actor, a diminutive comedian against Schwarzenegger with all the physical comedy that they're going to do in this movie. You know, checking each other and all this other stuff. Like, you had to, so it's like he didn't get this part on ability. He got the part because next to Schwarzenegger, he's kind of a match height-wise. But yeah, Sinbad is just he just rambles through most of the picture. And his stuff isn't funny. His character doesn't have a point of view other than it's opposite of whatever is being said in that scene. You know, and I was a little confused because, like, he comes across as a sob story of, like, oh, we're poor and, you know, it's hard to do things for your kids when you don't have any money. I'm just a government worker. So I really want to make it up to him this year by doing something extra special, except that he acts like an asshole throughout the entire film. As does Schwarzenegger. Let me make that point. I'm watching a movie where the dynamic is supposed to be, here's this dad who's supposed to learn that the lesson in life here is to, you know, to be with your family. That's what Christmas is all about. It's not about presents, it's about being there. It's about being present. Not presents. But we never quite get there with Schwarzenegger. And then with Sinbad, you're supposed to be, you know, booing him as the villain, as like the foil to Schwarzenegger, except that your setup is this sob story about how he's a government employee who's just trying to do right by his kid. And the only reason why you as an audience member would start to turn on him is he gets, as the situations themselves become sillier and more unbelievable, he too gets more ridiculous. Again, culminating in the stupid Turbo Man versus, you know, the leader or whatever the hell he was supposed to be, the villain of the thing. Who decided Jake Lloyd was a good idea? I mean, I don't remember relative to when the Star Wars prequels came out. I'm not entirely sure. This came out in '96. Sean, roughly when did Phantom Menace come out?
Oh, let's see. I actually know this one because I was just getting ready to leave South Dakota.
Was it 98 or 99?
Double check, but I believe it was 1999.
Okay.
So
I'll give the kid credit. We didn't know how terrible he was at this point.
Yes, 1999. Just
okay,
checked.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, in 1996 we didn't know how terrible Jake Lloyd was, but boy will we by the time 1999 rolls around. In any case, I still don't understand how the hell they got him into this picture because they give him a lot. And look, I know, you know, as Robert Winfrey likes to remind us, the worst thing you could have you want to act with in are children and pets, children and animals. But I don't know. I've seen some dogs that are better actors than Jake Lloyd. He's terrible and a poor kid. But you know, like I hate to bash on a child performance. Some of them, you know, some children's performances, they do the best they can, but they're just terrible. Then there's the Jake Lloyd level of horrible. Again, you're supposed to feel sorry for this kid, not through the performance he's giving. So let us sum up so the defense can get in here. Uneven script, unfunny script, characters you don't necessarily want to boo or cheer for. They're all just kind of different levels of awful. A script that was supposed to be about consumerism in the spirit of Christmas utterly losing its way and giving way to just pratfalls and sight gags. A ridiculous ending that stretches credulity. Just breaks it utterly, really. And performances that are either meh or worse. Your witness, sir.
So, yeah, I will admit, the script may be uneven and the message might be hokey. But If Jingle All the Way proves one thing, it's that there is no better holiday than Christmas for turn-your-brain-off movies that are somehow miraculously still enjoyable. Yeah, the message is trite, to say the very least. But here's the question you have to ask yourself. Just considering what I just said, does that necessarily make its message any less valid? And let's face it, it's always going to need updating for a new generation, especially ones that kind of become increasingly swept up in the madness of holiday materialism. So you had to take that and kind of dress that heartwarming touch up in some modern, relatable attire. And in fact, it's kind of fitting that they would get Sinbad for that, since much of his comedy, when it isn't physical and highly energetic, is kind of based on observation. There was the bit on Family Guy where Stewie lost to him on Star Search, and it was because Stewie was just so taken by Sinbad apparently saying something about white people be all like zombies at the mall. Well, you know what? That's what this might as well be. It might as well be kind of Sinbad instead of Schwarzenegger telling the story of what Black Friday be like for parents. And really what caught me off guard about this was the chemistry that he and Schwarzenegger displayed on a couple levels. First off, when it came to physically somebody who was going to have to go toe to toe in these slapstick battles with fucking Conan, somebody like you could have gone one of two ways. You could have gone with either a really diminutive Kevin Hart type, which, okay, would have probably been hysterical, or you kind of go the other way and you go with somebody of actually kind of a taller stature who would match up with Arnold pretty well. Even though they're just a couple of suburban dads. And say what you will about Sinbad, but when his manic energy works, it works. You just kind of can't help but be drawn to him. And you were absolutely right. This does trade on Arnold's charisma, which by this point was an interesting pivot that he had to make. He was at a stage in his career where the evolution of the action genre, quite frankly, had left the kind of larger-than-life authentic presence that he brought to the screen behind, and he had to go to something else. And that's something about Schwarzenegger that everybody who has ever known him behind the scenes, from his bodybuilding days up through his rise up through Hollywood to his political career, what they have all said about him as arguably his most overwhelming quality. And that is that he walks into a room and just, you instantly like him. You're instantly drawn to a certain energy about him. And it feels weird to say this because we're talking about the guy whose huge breakout was playing the Terminator. But at that point, he kind of had to turn and kind of creatively apply that charisma elsewhere. And it turned out that against what audiences would have expected, it kind of works to see a big guy with that kind of energy about him. It's kind of the same reason why people are wowed by, get ready to take a drink, The Big Show. Is because he's this big guy who should have this enormous, fearsome presence, and yet he's got this really kind of sweet likability and this comic timing. And when you put it together, you have two guys who yeah, while you may not necessarily invest in them as good guys necessarily, you can also see that they're not bad guys. You can tell that they're just a couple of dads who are kind of just driven mad by this misguided perception of what's important at Christmas. And that is, they both want the most expensive, hottest toy around for their kids, so they can be a hero in the eyes of their kids. And I'm not going to say it makes all the shit they pull on each other forgivable, but it makes it understandable. Because you watch it, and yeah, it might be an exaggeration for some of, shall we call it, again, get ready to take a drink, some of the spots that get called in their match. But when every year we see almost exactly these kinds of shenanigans over a certain toy on Black Friday, I mean, those of us who are mine and Mark's age, we remember the Furbies. We remember the Tickle Me Elmos. If you were to go back far enough, my parents would probably remember Teddy Ruxpin, the Nintendo Entertainment System, Cabbage Patch Dolls. List goes on and on. Those toys that are so big and so popular that all of a sudden Toys R Us and Walmart or Target just turns into the Roman fucking Colosseum, as these otherwise mild-mannered suburban moms and dads are just throwing down and ready to shed blood just to get some expensive piece of plastic. So, yeah, it may be over the top, but then you look at it, you gotta go, maybe not by all that much. And it helps that Schwarzenegger does kind of get another foil who is a snake in the grass. And you know what? It's kind of obvious for reasons I'll get to momentarily. But and you kind of get the impression there's something a little off about Phil Hartman right from the beginning. But that is because the man played sleazy and swarthy so damn well anytime he's called upon to do it. There's a reason he was the original choice to voice Zapp Brannigan. Is because he could just bring characters like that to life. It was that sly smirk, that little bit of single malt Scotch smoothness in his voice. Well, actually, in his case, it was so sleazy. We might as well be talking about, not exactly the Glenlivet, but like some Cutty Shark, or perhaps some lower tier Johnny Walker to go around there. But it gives him just kind of one more front to fight the battle on. He's as obvious as what's his name? Judge Smales in Caddyshack, or one of the hoity-toity frat boys in Animal House. Yeah, it's obvious. Yeah, it's telegraphed. But it doesn't make him any less of a welcome addition. I mean, let's face it. And it helps that you've got all these pieces coming together under just the right director. Because, let's remember, we're talking about the man behind the first Home Alone here. That's who directed this. Chris Columbus. He has such an eye for making lovable slapstick comedy. He does it so phenomenally well, and I love the way he can sometimes, whether you're talking about Daniel Stern and Joe Pesci, or Sinbad and Arnold Schwarzenegger, he has a way of just seemingly bringing it the best out of the most unlikely people, and it also bears noting, when it comes to a little bit of action, this is also the guy who brought the first Harry Potter movie to life. This is the man behind Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And it kind of you can kind of tell. He has a little bit of a style about him in terms of how he shoots the chaos so perfectly, so much so that you can just kind of treasure like every moment of every heavy impact of every pratfall as it happens. And the good thing is he brings all this to a simpler kind of comedy. If I had to best describe it, it isn't trying. It's going to sound like I'm contradicting myself to say this, but while in terms of its settings and its themes, it's extremely modern, in terms of its approach and its tone, it's a return to this kind of simpler sort of comedy. Like I said, it is the turn your brain off kind. It has a very plain, obvious plot. You know how it's going to end, but still you're able to just sit back and kind of savor the journey as it gets there. And when you get to the end, the one we've kind of been casting as the pseudo bad guy in Sinbad, he gets his redemption, and you end up kind of rooting for the guy and appreciating him, and maybe even just still respecting him just a little bit. It's something right out of the 80s, and I guess when we're in a time when so many movies try so hard to kind of be so smart and sometimes so kind of on the nose and contemporary with their humor and everything, it's just nice. It's like a warm mug of cocoa, just the way your mom used to make it. To kind of go back to, again, if you're about mine and Mark's age, to a time almost like circa the 1980s or the early 90s, when screwball comedies like this could just be enjoyed without having to have something else to read into it. It's not exactly a work of art, but it's a very nice piece of candy. And that's why I can absolutely see how, number one, yeah, critics were not going for it. They wanted something more from it. But again, this is one of those rare times of year when a movie like this is just what the doctor ordered. And that's why I can completely see why it has kind of transcended its mediocre box office and its really abysmal reviews to become a kind of a beloved, accepted classic. All yours to wrap up.
I really only have one other thing to add, and that is, let's talk about Home Alone for a moment. Home Alone works, as a silly movie where a child is able to take out home invaders with Looney Tunes style traps. One, because Macaulay Culkin is extremely likable. Not to mention, who doesn't root for a fucking child whose home is being invaded and robbed? Like you'd have to be kind of a dick to be rooting for the robbers in that one, no matter how awful he might you might perceive him to be. And that's the thing, Macaulay Culkin's not awful. He was a cute kid back in those days, and his performance worked for what they were going for. And of course, Joe Pesci and the other actor in this are also funny as essentially the Wile E. Coyotes taking the pratfalls. If you look at the Santa Claus, okay, the Santa Claus kind of has the same type of dad in it, right? We have a dad who's essentially screwing up, He's not spending the time I think he's in the middle of a divorce, or they've already been divorced. It's the same old thing. A lot of these dads, and to the point where I could do a whole other podcast on how this trope is so frustrating. You have dads who are successful, but have damaged their relationship with their family by becoming the successes that they've become. I feel like that's all the dads in these movies. But again, I started with, hey, let's look at the Santa Claus. So there you have Tim Allen. Tim Allen was a really likable dad. He was a really likable character, and when and his arc is earned. Okay, some of these other movies that we talk about. Look, I'm not against the idea of the silly Christmas movie, the silly turn your brain off Christmas movie, but I feel like the arcs that these dads go through, or these moms, if you watch those movies, or the kids, still have to be earned. I don't think we should walk away from halfway decent screenwriting, just for the sake of being entertained for 90-minute intervals. That's the difference between some of the movies that I've mentioned and Jingle All the Way. The satisfactory conclusion that wraps it all together isn't earned in any way by any of the actors in the movie. Like I said, the performances are all meh to bad. And the characters, such as they're written, and I believe I used the word underwritten, and I'll repeat it again, extremely underwritten, aren't necessarily people you want to see succeed in the end. So my recommendation on this one is, if it's on cable, if you're flipping through one day and you happen to be around children, maybe a child whose most recent favorite movie is Rocky IV, and you want to show that you want to show this to him because, and I will tell you this, I watched this with my son, and he thought the best parts of it was when they were fighting in the mall. Like he lost interest after that. And I think that, to me, sums up what's wrong with this movie. Once they're not fighting in the shopping centers, the movie becomes just sort of a bore and pointless. So, that's it. That's all. That's my argument.
Yeah, and this is one time when I really didn't have to exaggerate or twist my opinion to suit my given side. Mm-hmm. I legitimately like this movie.
I've never seen it.
Absolutely do.
Schwarzenegger's comedies are hit and miss for me. Like, I like Twins, but Twins, Schwarzenegger just had to be Schwarzenegger and let Danny DeVito do a lot of the heavy lifting. And my favorite part of that movie is when Danny DeVito realizes he's the leftover parts that weren't needed to make a perfect person, and he has to deal with that. Like, wow, that's rough.
And let's not discount kind of really what a genius approach Kindergarten Cop was. Let's take Schwarzenegger, let's make him the kind of sort of toned down version of kind of the hard-boiled action hero he's used to playing. And then let's take that character and take it out of its element and then put this badass in charge of a room full of unruly crumb snatchers.
Yeah, it's great. You took the archetype and turned it on its head. Kindergarten Cop works. Because Schwarzenegger is doing what he does best in an environment that's unfamiliar, and that's where the laughs come from. But again, the point that I'm making here is that this movie tried to make him a comedian. He's not a comedian. Schwarzenegger's comedy works when he's doing what he always does, but the environment around him is so different that it produces laughs. Or the actors around him are doing the heavy lifting. He just has to be him. Again, Twins is the best example of that. I'm trying to think of, Stallone had that problem too. Where like he went through this period of his career where he was doing like action comedies. I think Oscar being the best example of him trying comedy and failing. And realizing I got to go back to my bread and butter, and then I think Copland ended up being his sort of return to form, which is awesome, by the way. I'm assuming you've seen Copland.
Man, if I have, it's been so long that I don't even remember what the plot was.
But I mean, Schwarzenegger and Stallone both have that issue where they're good enough. They're good enough to try different styles of movies as long as they stay kind of in the little zone that they're really good at. And
I think Arnold kind of made that pivot a little more smoothly than Stallone did because he had a few early successes. When you think of Stallone trying to go for lighter-hearted fare, let me ask you, what's really the very first movie that comes to mind?
Stop or My Mom Will Shoot.
Ah, yes, exactly. And therein lies the problem. Arnold was able to make Twins kind of in the midst of all the other action movies that he was making. He made Kindergarten Cop. I want to say, I think it was right around the time he made Terminator 2.
So I have his filmography up. Okay.
Yeah.
Just to get, if you're young and you're watching this, you're not as familiar with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Just listen to how we start. Okay, I'm going to skip a few, but basically, This is the first few I'm going to read you here are his early career, and this is the best of Arnold. Terminator, Commando, Predator, Running Man, Total Recall. Okay? Around Total Recall is when he starts doing the switch to comedy. Twins, 1988. Kindergarten Cop, 1990. Which Terminator 2 is also in 91. Dave, Last Action Hero, and Beretta's Island in 1993. So I barely remember Dave, which I guess he just had a cameo in, so we won't count that. But the big one in that one is Last Action Hero, which some people hate, but I thought it really worked as a parody of the action genre. Then in 94, he makes True Lies and Junior. So he's kind of going back and forth between the... and True Lies is amazing. People love True Lies, but that worked as kind of like an action movie with some comedic tones to it. And Junior, which was an utter failure. This is just horrible. 96 is Eraser and Jingle All the Way. So 96 is a terrible year. He's Mr. Freeze in 1997. And then after this, things start to go downhill for a little while. But just if you look at some of the comedies that I read off there, I mean, like he definitely wasn't 100% committed to the comedy genre. He kept making action movies as well, but there's not a lot of successes here.
Well, it's kind of like what we talked about last week when we talked about Stallone. You talked about how his acting became a bit more articulate and displayed some more range over time. But even then, even at his best, when kind of stretching those particular muscles, Stallone could carry off action and drama well, and that's about it. Because he didn't have Arnold's raw, likable, charming charisma. He had kind of a raw, everyman grit. That was why he made a great John Rambo. That was why he made a great Rocky Balboa. It's why he made a great guy from Over the Top who was arm wrestling to keep his kid.
That's a great movie.
Arnold, kind of once he started really learning English and kind of came into his own after coming over from Austria, he proved that he could translate that and kind of flex over to that pretty easily and clearly have a good time doing it. I mean, that's why in the midst of, Junior, I didn't think was all that great. But like I said, I love Kindergarten Cop, and he made that right around the time he made Terminator 2.
But that's what I was getting. That was what I was saying, though. I think like it's Twins, Kindergarten Cop, and then after that, he doesn't make a good comedy. Again, Junior, Jingle All the Way, Dr. Dolittle 2. This isn't getting any good.
That's right. How easily I forget he was in Dr. Dolittle 2.
So yeah, I think it was a good try with this one. Here's the thing. I think he is done a disservice by a poorly written script. I think this works if after some script doctoring. I think you lose some of the physical comedy. Rather, if you keep the physical comedy in there as far as trying to get the toy, but there's some second act problems that I don't know. I would say like after the Jim Belushi thing, the movie just goes downhill. Like they didn't know what to do after that. I thought kind of the Jim Belushi thing was was a good idea. That he's so desperate to get this toy that he's willing to do something shady. But that's when he needed to look at himself in the mirror and go, like instead of having it broken up by cops and and it's funny to watch him fight the Santas and fight Paul White and everything. But I think instead of having it broken up by the cops, he needs to realize this was a terrible decision. Make a run for it. Get in the car and go home. And face whatever and face whatever ramifications are there for him at home, rather than I kept waiting for him to get in the car and go, and he just keeps digging the hole deeper. It was the radio thing that's the next bit, and then that also causes his car to get stripped. I was like, yeah, we need to lose that entire scene. He needed after the Santa bit, he needed to just go home and then figure out what to do next. But like I said, I think his character needed to be fleshed out a little bit more, and I think there needed to be some work on the second act for this to work well. I also think that ending, I don't know. You're in charge of script doctoring this. Do you keep that stupid ending, or do you do something different?
Oh boy,
because to me it felt completely unearned. So if you're gonna make him Turbo Man at the end, make him a better character.
Maybe I would have, because now that I'm thinking about some movies that are kind of along the same line, where they've got a little bit of a hokey ending, and it isn't, as you like I said, it's kind of unearned, but there's at least a little bit of an evolution. Like if we're going back to Home Alone, you kind of have the moments where Kevin realizes he's in over his head. Maybe he was a little bit of a jerk and unappreciative of his family, and then he has the conversation with his neighbor in the church. And for the first time, he's not really Dennis the Menace. He's just kind of a kid speaking from the heart. And I guess we could have done with maybe a little more of a moment where Arnold kind of shows that it's genuine, that he's sort of changed. Otherwise, and it feels weird saying this because I actually like this comedy too. It comes across more like Jim Carrey and Liar Liar,
mm-hmm.
which again, a movie that I completely unironically love. But that's another one where the sudden redemption really feels unearned.
I'll be curious to see what you pick next year. You're in charge of the holiday pick. For me.
Oh man, that's going to be a tough one. And there are so many good ones I could do too. I'll get back to it. I'll give it some real thought. I kind of need some happy stuff to think about for the holidays. So thinking about what we'll get to talk about next time around, that may just do the trick.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't. You have a year to figure this out. Was not asking you to figure it out.
We
now.
have a year. We have a year. Given my occasional penchant for procrastination in all things, it's entirely possible. I will be waiting until probably like around when my birthday rolls around.
Yeah, I'll harass you when it gets close to December. We never did. I don't think we ever did Long Road to Ruins for the Santa Claus or Home Alone, did we? I know we did it for Die Hard.
Shit.
I know we did it for Die Hard.
God, Home Alone's going to mean we have to watch Home Alone 3.
I don't remember what. I mean, I do you remember what Christmas trilogy we've done? We did Long Road to Ruins for.
We did Die Hard.
we definitely did Die Hard. I swear we did Die Hard.
Yeah, you're right that I don't think we did the Santa Claus. I could be wrong, but I don't think we did.
I'm looking at last year we did The Empire Strikes Back. That was 2017, and I don't think we did anything else. I don't think we did any other ones. Oh, well, we did Jumanji. That was the other one that we did. We did the original Jumanji, so we really didn't do a holiday one in 2017. We did ones related to whatever movies were coming out at the time. Let's see. How about 2016? I know one year we did Gremlins, but you weren't on the show. I think that was me and Jesse.
No.
We did the Cornetto trilogy in 2016.
We did. Maybe we should just go ahead and just do the Santa Claus. I mean, and I have no problem with that because let's see. I think last year I watched the first movie. I don't know if I watched the two sequels.
We did the Mighty Ducks in 2015.
Yeah, because that also produced one of my favorite Benjamin Cologne title cards.
I can't believe I've been keeping track of these things for as long as I have.
I'm a little stunned myself.
Yep, we did Gremlins in 2014. My God.
If we were to do a one-off on trial, I would say we could do Batman Returns.
Ugh.
It's a Christmas movie.
Oh. No, I like your idea to do. I wanted to do the Santa Claus when we were doing Long Road to Ruin. We just never got to it.
Well, then there we go. We're doing the Santa Claus. Then that's my pick.
Okay.
We will get to Home Alone, though. We have to get to Home Alone.
Long Road to Ruin, the Santa Claus. There you go. Instead of an on trial, now we're doing a Long Road to Ruin. Got it?
And some year I should really finally sit down and watch Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas.
You really should. It's amazing.
I've never seen it.
Oh, you got it. You're missing out.
I feel like at some point you and I should have a bet or something, and the loser has to watch one of those crappy Hallmark Christmas movies.
My wife is so into those. Every time I've come home on the weekends and she's just laid down on the couch, nothing but Hallmark Christmas movies going on. All right, what's up with that?
Allison Pregler, the host of Movie Nights, and I were talking, and I didn't realize that there is a sequel to Holiday in Handcuffs.
Sounds kinky. All right.
It's only if you have secret folders of Mario Lopez and Melissa Joan Hart fanfic that I don't know about.
All right, folks. Tomorrow night on the Metal Hammer of Doom.
Look at that shift away from the subject.
We'll be reviewing the new Metal Church, Damned If I Do, and on Thursday, assuming I finish watching them in time, we'll be reviewing the new Castlevania Seasons 1 and 2. Yesterday, we did our holiday special on Source Material was the Harley Quinn holiday special. We had a guest. Whew. Alexis Hana. Oy vey.
There is no active call.
Thank you. Stupid. I was on Echo. Next week, Alexis Hana will be on Source Material again. We'll be looking at Batwoman Elegy. Pat Mullen and I will try to figure out how we're going to talk about Elseworlds, the Arrowverse crossover, which had a lot of promise. I was really excited for it. I just watched the last part tonight. And, I don't know what I think about it. I just know that I was not as good as I thought it was going to be. And our Christmas episode for the Metal Hammer of Doom is the 19th. We're going to be looking at Tarja, her Christmas album from last year. And then the week of Christmas, we'll be doing the Aquaman shows. And then the week of New Year's, the Bumblebee shows, and our Metal Hammer of Doom year-end special. Okay, well, I try not to choke. Why don't you go ahead and do your plug, Sean?
For the most part, if for some damn reason, bless your goofy little heart, you can't get enough of me, the best place to find me is over at twitch.tv/Comer Codex. I have recommitted myself to being a variety video game streamer. I focus primarily on single-player PS4 games. Occasional forays into some multiplayer stuff. Saturday nights, myself and occasional friend of the Rodelichen Broadcasting Network, Cole Marentet, and I, at 7 p.m. Central Time, jump into Monster Hunter World together for some open-world brawling, dinosaur-slaying action. And the best place to find out when I'm going to be streaming, why, that would be over at twitter.com/Comer Codex, where I provide steady daily rantings and ravings about this, that, and the other thing, and also updates around an hour or so usually before I plan on going live.
All right. Thank you for joining us here on Trial. Court is now out of session. Be well, be safe, and behave.